The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, cutting through my coffee-scented routine like a blade through silk. My mother was gone. At 26, I thought I had prepared myself for this moment, watching her battle illness for months, but nothing truly prepares you for the hollow echo of finality. The funeral arrangements, the paperwork, the endless stream of distant relatives offering hollow condolences, it all blurred together in a haze of grief and exhaustion. When the dust settled, I found myself holding the deed to a house I barely remembered visiting as a child. My mother's farmhouse stood 40 miles outside the city, perched in the middle of what used to be thriving agricultural land. The lawyer explained that most of the surrounding farms had been abandoned over the past decade, their owners either selling to developers who never developed, or simply walking away when the soil stopped yielding profits. My cramped studio apartment with its paper-thin walls and neighbors who played music until 3 a.m. had been my prison for the past 2 years. The rent consumed nearly half my paycheck from the auto parts store, leaving me surviving on ramen noodles and the occasional splurge of fast food. The farmhouse represented something I had never dared dream of: actual space, silence, and best of all, no monthly rent bleeding me dry. The decision wasn't easy. The house sat isolated, connected to the main road by a quarter-mile dirt path that hadn't seen maintenance in years. But with my lease ending in 6 weeks and my savings account laughing at me with its double-digit balance, the choice became clear. I would move in, save money for a few years, and then sell the property to buy something closer to civilization. The moving truck couldn't make it down the overgrown path, so I had to carry everything the last 100 yards myself. Box by box, I transported my meager possessions while tall grass brushed against my legs and invisible insects buzzed around my sweating face. The house loomed larger as I approached, its weathered wood siding and wraparound porch giving it the appearance of something from a different era. Inside, dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. My mother's belongings sat exactly where she had left them, her reading glasses on the kitchen table, a half-finished crossword puzzle folded beside her favorite coffee mug. The silence felt heavy, not peaceful but loaded with memories I wasn't ready to confront. I spent the first week in a cleaning frenzy, scrubbing away years of neglect and arranging my belongings in rooms that felt enormous after my closet-sized apartment. Each evening, I would collapse onto the old couch, surrounded by the kind of quiet that city dwellers forget exists. No sirens, no honking horns, no footsteps from the apartment above. Just the gentle whisper of wind through the tall grass that surrounded the house like a green ocean. It was during one of these peaceful evenings, while I was organizing my mother's bedroom, that I first heard the sound that would haunt my dreams for months to come. The distant rumble of an engine, growing steadily louder. I paused, my hand still holding a stack of my mother's old photographs, and listened as the sound grew closer. Through the bedroom window, I watched a pickup truck emerge from the darkness, its headlights cutting twin paths through the overgrown grass of the access road. The truck was old, maybe from the 70s, with a paint job that had surrendered to rust years ago. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if the driver was taking time to study every detail of the approach. My heart began to pick up pace as the truck drew nearer. Out here, there was only one destination: my house. No wrong turns, no neighboring driveways, no reason for anyone to drive down this forgotten path unless they specifically intended to visit me. But I knew no one who would come calling at this hour, and certainly no one who drove a truck like that. The vehicle slowed as it neared the end of the path, close enough that I could make out the silhouette of a man behind the wheel. He sat motionless for what felt like an eternity, his headlights illuminating the field beyond my house in stark white light. I pressed myself against the window frame, trying to remain invisible while getting a better look at this unexpected visitor. Then, without warning, the truck lurched into motion. The driver performed a clumsy three-point turn, his headlights sweeping across the house like searchlights, before accelerating back down the path toward the main road. I stood frozen at the window long after the sound of the engine had faded, trying to convince myself that it had been nothing more than someone who had taken a wrong turn. The rational part of my mind offered reasonable explanations. Maybe it was a curious neighbor, wondering who had moved into the old place. Perhaps it was someone who had known my mother, coming to pay respects but losing courage at the last moment. These thoughts provided some comfort as I finished my cleaning and tried to settle into my evening routine. But sleep came fitfully that night. Every settling of the old house, every whisper of wind through the eaves, made me bolt upright in bed. The isolation that had seemed so appealing during daylight hours now felt oppressive, even dangerous. I found myself calculating how long it would take for help to arrive if I needed it, and the answer wasn't comforting. The next few days passed without incident, and I began to relax. I established routines: morning coffee on the front porch, afternoons organizing the house, evenings cooking actual meals in the spacious kitchen. The property started to feel like home rather than a temporary refuge. Sunday evening arrived gray and humid, with the kind of heavy air that promises storms. I had prepared what felt like a feast compared to my usual bachelor fare: pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, even a small apple pie cooling on the windowsill. The simple pleasure of cooking in a real kitchen, with counter space and a proper stove, made me feel more optimistic about my decision to move here. I was settled on the couch, savoring both my home-cooked meal and a movie I had been wanting to watch, when a familiar sound drifted in from the distance. The rumble of an old engine, growing steadily closer. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth as the realization hit me: this was no coincidence. This time, I was ready. I moved quickly to the living room window and peered out into the darkness. The same pickup truck was making its way down the path, but something was different. Where before it had approached with headlights blazing, now it moved through the night like a predator, its lights extinguished, barely visible against the dark landscape. My hands began to shake as I watched the truck navigate the familiar path without the aid of headlights. This driver knew the way. He had been here before, possibly many times. The casual way he maneuvered around the worst potholes and avoided the overgrown bushes that scraped against unwary vehicles suggested an intimacy with this route that chilled me to the bone. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, noting with rising panic that it was nearly 1 in the morning. No legitimate visitor arrives at this hour. No friend or neighbor or curious passerby drives with their lights off through abandoned farmland in the dead of night. This was something else entirely, something that made my primitive survival instincts scream warnings. The truck pulled up directly in front of the house and stopped. Through the thin curtains, I could see the dark bulk of the vehicle sitting in my front yard like a mechanical beast. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened with a rusty creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the still night air. From my hidden position behind the curtain, I watched a figure emerge from the truck. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothing that made him nearly invisible against the night sky. His movements were confident, unhurried, as if he belonged here more than I did. He stood beside his truck for a moment, surveying the house with the attention of someone conducting an inspection. Then he began walking toward my front door. Every instinct I possessed told me to run, to escape through the back door and disappear into the tall grass, but my legs felt like concrete pillars. I could only watch in horrified fascination as this stranger approached my porch with the casual gait of someone coming home from work. The wooden steps creaked under his weight as he climbed to the front door. I held my breath, waiting for the inevitable knock or ring of the doorbell, preparing myself for the confrontation that seemed unavoidable. But the sounds never came. Instead, an even more unsettling silence fell over the house. Curiosity overcame terror, and I crept toward the front door. The old house had a peephole installed in the heavy wooden door, though I doubted my mother had ever needed to use it out here. With trembling hands, I approached the tiny window and peered outside. He was standing directly in front of the door, close enough that I could see the stubble on his weathered face. His eyes were fixed on the door with an intensity that made my skin crawl, as if he could see through the wood and knew I was watching him. There was something calculating in his expression, a patient evaluation that suggested he was weighing options, considering possibilities. For what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, we remained frozen in this silent standoff, him staring at the door, me staring at him through the peephole. Then, without warning, he turned and walked back to his truck. The engine coughed to life, and he drove away as mysteriously as he had arrived. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The dispatcher was professional but not particularly alarmed by my report. A strange man on my property wasn't technically a crime, especially if he hadn't attempted to break in or threaten me directly. They would send a patrol car to check the area, but there wasn't much else they could do. The police officer who arrived 40 minutes later was kind but practical. He found no evidence of the visitor beyond some tire tracks in the soft earth near my front door. He took my statement, advised me to keep my doors locked, and suggested I might want to consider installing some security lights. Then he drove away, leaving me alone with my fears and the vast darkness surrounding my isolated home. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in bed with every light in the house burning, listening to the symphony of night sounds that I had never noticed before. The house creaked and settled around me like a living thing, and every sound could have been footsteps, every shadow could have been an intruder. As dawn finally broke across the empty fields, I convinced myself that it was over. The man had gotten whatever he came for, a look at the house, confirmation that someone was living there, or perhaps just the thrill of frightening a stranger. He wouldn't be back. There was no reason for him to return. I was wrong. The sound that woke me wasn't the rumble of an engine this time, but something far more subtle and infinitely more terrifying. A single, deliberate knock at my front door. Just one firm rap against the wood, as if someone was testing whether anyone was home. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs, and listened to the silence that followed. The digital clock beside my bed glowed 3:17 a.m. in accusing red numbers. I strained my ears for any sound, the truck engine, footsteps on gravel, even the whisper of movement through tall grass. But there was nothing. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped out of bed and padded to the bedroom window. The front yard was empty, no vehicle in sight. The moonlight cast everything in silver and shadow, turning the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. If someone had knocked on my door, where had they gone? I crept toward the staircase that led down to the main floor, my bare feet silent on the worn wooden boards. At the top of the stairs, I paused and listened again. The house felt different somehow, as if the very air had changed while I slept. There was a quality to the silence that raised the hair on my arms, a sense of presence where there should have been emptiness. And then I saw it. The front door, which I distinctly remembered locking before going to bed, stood slightly ajar. Not wide open, not obviously disturbed, but open enough to let in a thin slice of cool night air and the distant sound of insects chirping in the fields. Terror paralyzed me completely. My rational mind offered desperate explanations. Maybe I hadn't locked it properly, maybe the old house had settled and the door had swung open on its own. But my primitive brain knew better. Someone had been inside my house. Someone might still be inside my house. As if summoned by my thoughts, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway below. Slow, measured steps on the hardwood floor, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The steps seemed to be coming from the direction of the kitchen, heading toward the living room. I scrambled backward from the top of the stairs, my mind racing through impossible options. The back staircase was at the other end of the hall, but I would have to cross the main stairway to reach it, exposing myself to whoever was downstairs. The windows in the upstairs bedrooms were too high to jump from safely. I was trapped on the second floor of my own house with an intruder who was making no effort to hide his presence. The spare bedroom next to my mother's room had a lock on the door, a simple privacy lock, but better than nothing. I slipped inside and turned the flimsy mechanism, knowing it would never stop a determined intruder but hoping it might buy me enough time to call for help. My phone was in my trembling hands before the door was fully closed. I dialed 911 with fingers that seemed too thick and clumsy to work properly, then huddled in the corner of the room, straining to hear what was happening below me. The footsteps had reached the bottom of the stairs and began climbing upward. Each step on the old wooden stairs announced his progress with a soft creak. He wasn't trying to be quiet anymore, wasn't concerned about waking me. The casual nature of his approach was somehow more terrifying than if he had been sneaking around. When the 911 operator answered, I couldn't speak. The footsteps had reached the top of the stairs and were now moving down the hallway toward the bedrooms. If I made any sound, he would know exactly where I was hiding. So I sat there clutching the phone, listening to the operator's increasingly urgent questions while footsteps passed directly outside my door. They continued down the hall to my mother's bedroom, the room where I had been sleeping. I heard him enter, heard the sounds of drawers being opened, objects being moved around. He was searching for something specific, going through my mother's belongings with the methodical approach of someone who knew what he was looking for. The search continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. He went through the dresser, the closet, even lifted the mattress to check underneath. I could hear papers rustling, boxes being opened and closed, the soft thud of items being set aside. This wasn't random vandalism or opportunistic theft. This was a targeted search by someone who believed my mother had possessed something valuable enough to risk breaking into an occupied house to find. Finally, the sound stopped. I heard his footsteps move back down the hallway, pause at the top of the stairs, then descend to the main floor. More searching sounds drifted up from below, kitchen cabinets opening, furniture being moved. The same methodical exploration extended to the downstairs rooms. Only when I heard the front door close did I dare to speak to the 911 operator who had been waiting patiently on the line. My voice came out as a hoarse whisper, barely recognizable as my own. I explained what had happened, gave them my address, and begged them to hurry. But even as I was speaking to the operator, I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Footsteps in the backyard, moving through the tall grass behind the house. I crept to the back window of the spare bedroom and peered out into the darkness. He was there, walking away from the house toward the empty field that stretched for miles behind the property. The moonlight caught him occasionally as he pushed through the tall grass, a dark figure moving with purpose across the abandoned landscape. I watched until he disappeared completely into the vast emptiness, swallowed by the night and the endless field. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but by then the intruder was long gone. They found evidence of his search, drawers left open, papers scattered, furniture moved slightly out of place. But they found no signs of forced entry beyond the unlocked front door, no fingerprints on the obvious surfaces, no clear indication of what he might have been looking for. The officer who took my statement was the same one who had responded to my first call. He looked troubled as he surveyed the scene, taking photographs and making notes. When I described seeing the man disappear into the field behind the house, he nodded grimly. That field connects to about 3 square miles of abandoned farmland, he explained. If someone knows the area well enough, they could disappear out there for days. Could have a vehicle parked anywhere along the back roads, could be camping rough, could have access to any number of abandoned buildings. The implication was clear. This wasn't some random criminal who had stumbled onto my property. This was someone with local knowledge, someone who understood the geography well enough to plan an escape route through terrain that would confuse outsiders. As the police finished their investigation and prepared to leave, the officer pulled me aside for a private conversation. His expression was serious, almost fatherly, as he chose his words carefully. "I've been working this area for 15 years, he said quietly. "Your mother was a good woman, kept to herself mostly, but she was respected in the community. Now, I don't want to scare you more than you already are, but I think you need to understand something." He paused, glancing around the empty house as if checking for eavesdroppers. "This man, whoever he is, he knew you were home. He had to have seen the lights, seen your car in the driveway. But he came in anyway. He searched that bedroom knowing you might wake up, might walk in on him. That tells me he was looking for something important enough to take serious risks." The officer's words confirmed my own terrifying realization. The intruder hadn't been deterred by my presence, he had factored it into his plans. Which raised the question that had been haunting me since I first heard his footsteps in my hallway. What would he have done if I had still been sleeping in that bedroom when he decided to search it? Sleep was impossible for the remainder of that night. I sat in the living room with every light blazing and a baseball bat across my knees, jumping at every sound the old house made. By morning, my decision was made. Whatever my mother might have hidden in this house, whatever the intruder was looking for, it wasn't worth my life. I called a realtor that same day and put the house on the market. The asking price was reasonable enough that I fielded 3 offers within a week, and the sale was finalized within a month. I moved back to the city, to to an apartment with thin walls and noisy neighbors, but also with security systems and other people within shouting distance. The house sold to a young couple with dreams of rural living and organic farming. I never told them about my midnight visitor or the methodical search that had driven me away. I told myself they would be fine, that the intruder had been looking for something specific to my mother, something that was either long gone or had never existed in the first place. But I couldn't completely let go of my worry for the new owners, or my curiosity about what had driven a man to take such desperate risks. Every few months, I would search online for news reports from that area, checking for break-ins or unusual incidents at my old address. The searches always came back empty. No reports of trespassing, no break-ins, no mysterious visitors in the night. The house and its new occupants seemed to be living in peace, undisturbed by whatever had brought my night visitor to their door. This should have been comforting, but instead it left me with more questions than answers. Had the intruder found what he was looking for during his search? Had he given up his quest, or simply moved on to other possibilities? Most unsettling of all, had my mother really possessed something valuable enough to drive a stranger to break into an occupied house in the middle of the night? These questions follow me still, surfacing unexpectedly in quiet moments when my guard is down. I think about that figure disappearing into the endless field behind the house, about the patient way he had stood on my porch evaluating his options, about the methodical search that suggested he knew exactly what he was looking for. Sometimes, in the city apartment that never quite feels like home, I catch myself listening for the sound of an old truck engine in the distance. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I wonder if he's still out there somewhere, still searching, still waiting for another opportunity to find whatever my mother took to her grave. The field behind my mother's house stretches for miles in every direction, empty and wild and full of places where secrets can disappear forever. Maybe that's where the answers lie, buried somewhere in the tall grass under the endless sky. Maybe that's where they'll stay, and maybe that's for the best. But on quiet nights when the city sounds fade away and the darkness presses close around my windows, I still find myself wondering what treasures or terrors my mother left behind, and whether the man who came looking for them in the dead of night ever found what he was seeking in that vast, empty field where the past goes to hide from the present.